For this example, I'm going to talk a little bit about asynchronous loops in JavaScript and some of the problems that you encounter with them and how forEachAsync solves those problems. So first off, I'm going to start out with an example using Node.js, which is the server-side interpreter for JavaScript. Same principles apply as to browser JavaScript that you would run in Chrome or Firefox or whatever. But the example that I have using the file system is a lot more practical and really kind of drives home the point of some of these problems and how to solve them in a way that I think more people understand. So what I need to start out with is, let's see if I can got over here on my other screen, some things I need to just copy and paste. I'm going to create a directory called test files, full of files of different sizes. They're all just files with garbage data in them, but they will have I think the largest size I have here, is a megabyte, and the smallest is 0 bytes. So that bit of stuff I just copy and pasted, created this test files directory, and then if I list out the sizes there, you can see the files are of different sizes and they're named after what their size is. And in this case, when it's listing them, it happens to be listing them in alphabetical order. Which is not necessarily the order that they were created in. No, it isn't. Okay, good. So I'm going to call this file ls.js because the bit I'm going to write here is pretty similar to what ls does. So I'm going to start off with use strict, as I do with all JavaScript, so that I get the JavaScript version 5 instead of version 3. That works in the browser as well. It just basically prevents you from getting bugs. So in the browser, you might be familiar where you have to do something like $= window.jQuery or things like that, which jQuery happens to already do for you. Node has a much better system using require. So these are simply modules that Node uses. I know that I'm going to be needing to use fs and path. So what I want to do here is take, I'm going to let the user give me a path. So it's going to be either process.argv2, or if the user doesn't give me anything, then I'll just do path.join dir name test files. Okay, so dir path is either going to be what the user puts as an argument, and I'll show that in just a minute, or it's going to be joining the special variable __ dir name, which is Node's way of saying what file, the directory of the file that's currently being worked with, and then test files is the name of the directory that I created. So let me just real quick do console.log dir path, just show how that works. And then we'll get on to the main event here. So node ls, if I give it nothing, it prints out test files. If I give it .test files, then it uses .test files from the current directory. So that should make sense. All right. Now what I'm going to do is fs.readdir. So what readdir does is you give it a directory path. So I'm going to give it dir path. And then also a function to call when it's done reading that directory path, because that takes some amount of time. It's asynchronous. And then it's going to hand back a list of nodes, which will be the names of the nodes in that directory, where nodes could be files or directories or sockets or what have you. In this case, all of the nodes in the directory are actually file nodes. I know because I just created them. So I'll just go ahead and do console.log nodes and console.log all done. All right, just so you can see what that looks like. So I'll do node ls. It looks like something went wrong. Let's see, am I in the right directory? I have my test files there. Yep. What did I do? Where did I mistake? Oh, it takes error as the first argument, which is null because there was no error, and then nodes being the list of nodes. Okay, so node ls, boom. So similar output to what ls gives us. In fact, if I were to change it ever so slightly, just do a join here, then I would probably get the exact same output from doing ls and from doing node ls. Well, if I did ls test files. Yeah, so very similar, right? So now we're going to add the next feature. We're going to have it show what size the files are. So I'm going to get rid of this right here and do nodes.forEach. And the other construct from JavaScript 3, that for parens bracket bracket, is so buggy that it's best not to use it unless you know that you need to, because there are just tons of cases where it does weird things. It doesn't preserve, or it doesn't give you a scope for your loop. It can sometimes put things out of order or iterate over things that you didn't know were there. There's just some weird corner cases with that. forEach always works exactly the way that it's expected to. Very reliable, very fast, efficient. Very few cases where you'd need to use that other one. Anyway, so here I'm doing forEach to do my loop, and then I'm just going to have my node name, and then in order to find out how big that file is, I need to do fs.readFile. Well, I could technically do stat as well, but I want to do this way so I can demonstrate my purposes here. Excuse me. So now I'm going to tell it, let's see, let's do node path equals path.join dir path and node name. All right, so I'm going to read the file specified as node path. And the same thing here, I'm going to use a function. It accepts an error and, oh, error, and also this will be the contents of the file. So I'll just call this buffer. It's going to return back a binary buffer. Oh, and I forgot to specify the encoding type as null, which means that it's going to interpret it as binary. So I could specify that as, what I normally do is UTF-8, because that's what I'm normally working with. But in this case, I'm working with binary. So I'm just going to leave it as null, and it'll assume binary. So I've got this buffer here, and then I'm going to console.log node path, and then buffer.length. So to illustrate a point, I'm going to put back in this console.log nodes up top so that we can see something more clearly. So the expected result of this program is that I'm going to print out a list of the files that are in that directory that I've chosen. Then I'm going to, well, let me actually first just print out the directory that's been chosen. That way everything's really clear. Then I'm going to print out the length, the file name and the length of the file, and then when we've gone through all the files, I'm going to print out all done, right? So let me go ahead and run this. And let's see here. All done happens right after it lists the file names, and then the file names aren't actually in the same order as they were in the array. So in the array, block.bin was the last, and then here block.bin is the third. So that's, they're not, it almost looks like they're done by file size, but you can see that these two are out of order for it to be by file size. So it's kind of confusing as to why it chose that order. I'll explain that in just a second. Let me get back into the code here. So what we're actually doing, because for each is iterating over each of these items basically all at once. Like, it has no way of knowing when the read file is done. So what it's saying is, if there's 1,000 files in this directory, it's just going to read all 1,000 of them at the same time, which is going to make it really slow because it's going to disk thrash. And there's lots of other cases with network requests or HTTP requests or many different things that both in the browser and in Node where doing everything at once would be bad. And also, we don't know when things are done because we don't have any way of knowing with this. So now I'm going to fix this to work as expected using forEach async. So I'm going to do require. NPM recently changed their rules, and now I have to use lowercase letters. The module used to be camel case. So we've got forEachAsync in there, and now where I have this forEach loop, I'm just going to simply replace it with forEachAsync. Very, very easy. Then put in the array as the first argument and the callback as the second argument. And then in the callback, I also have to modify the callback to let it know what is next, or to say, like, commonly this would be called, you can call it fn, you can call it cb. For callback, you can call it next, you can call it done. I like to call it next. But when this gets called, it knows that it can go on to the next item in the array. So it won't continue forward until the first thing is done. And then in addition to that, we can tack on .then and put a function in here and be able to know when everything has been completed. So now if I run this again, node ls, you can see that the order of the array is the same order of the items being processed, and that when it's all done, it prints out all done, and it's only reading in one file at a time. For files, this turns out to be a really useful pattern. So there are cases where you'd want to do multiple things at a time in batches of, say, 4 things at a time or 10 things at a time. You probably would very rarely, if ever, want to do 1,000 things at a time. And for that, I have another module that's called lateral that I'll do another demonstration on later. But now, for right now, I just want to take this. This is a very concrete, I believe, easy to understand, easy to follow example. And we're going to translate it over to the browser, but because there's so many different possible ways that you might want to do this in the browser, and none of them are, it's just, this was the most concrete example, so I wanted to do this first. Now we'll go into that abstract browser example. So I'm going to create index.jade. I'm going to go ahead and give it doc type HTML, HTML head, body, title. This is forEachAsync example. And then I need to do a script tag. I'm actually going to use forEachAsync from Bower. Oh, one thing that I forgot to show you, let me go back a second. I actually already had the node modules directory in this example directory. What I had to do in order to use forEachAsync in ls.js, see where there's this require here. forEachAsync is not a normal part of Node. It's a module that I wrote. I had to do npm install forEachAsync. Before I did that, it would have given me an error. So I just forgot to mention that part. Sorry about that. Anyway, in index.jade, I'm going to specify Bower components. This is the, and you could just use wget or curl or whatever to download this script and put it in the place that you want yourself. So you don't have to use Bower here. You can just download the .js file and put it straight in the folder like you normally would. But Bower just downloads that for you, so it makes it a little bit simpler. And just like there's the node modules folder that npm uses, Bower uses the node components folder. And then we're also going to have another script that is called timeouts.js. That's going to be the file that we're demonstrating. And then I'm just going to put an h1 here, async, loops, code block, pre-block, call it loop console. Okay. Jade, index.jade, call it a prettify. And then here we have the HTML that I'm going to load in the browser. And I'll do bower install forEachAsync. It'll grab it. So now it's here in bower components, forEachAsync, forEachAsync. And then lastly, I need to create my timeouts.js. So I'll start off just by doing window.addEventListener to load, because we're going to be modifying the page, so I need to have the load there. And then I'm just going to have this little function called log that I'll both do console.log with. So instead of enumerating A, B, C, D, whatever in the log here, I'm just using this arguments, which is kind of like an array that has all of them in it. You don't have to worry about that part. This is it's just a log function. That's all you need to know. So I'm going to do document.querySelector. I believe I called it loop console. And I'm going to access the inner HTML and do plus equals, give it a new line, and then array.prototype.call arguments, and then give it a separator. This will make sense in a little bit. So now I'm just going to log. We're going to display an index and an item from an array. So the index of the array, the item of the array, and then also the time that it takes for that to load. So I'm just going to start with this really simple file. Oh, I forgot to do use strict. There we go. And now I will open this file up just to make sure that everything's working. Start out small, you know. So index.html. All right, looks great. Okay, so next step is I'm going to have an array of items. I'm going to do 2, 11, 37, 42, just some numbers I like, and call forEach on this array. And then it'll be item and I. And I just want to log out the item, I and the item. And then I'll leave the milliseconds blank for now. I go over here, refresh the page, boom. And everything is instantaneous because this is a synchronous loop. Now I'm going to add a set timeout. And I'm going to move this log function into the set timeout. And I'm going to put ms here. We need to create ms. I'm going to do var ms equals math.floor math.round, or not round, random, sorry, times 1000. So it's going to pick a number between 0 and 1000. And we're going to use that as the timeout. So notice previously everything goes in order, index 0, 1, 2, 3. The items print out in that same order, and it was taking 0 milliseconds. Now we'll also print out how long it takes in this log function. So I'm going to go ahead and hit refresh. All right, so 0, 1, 3, 2 doesn't happen in order. And the number of milliseconds it takes. Now the amount of time, this adds up to roughly 3.5 seconds. It did not take 3.5 seconds, or I guess it's closer to 3 seconds, 2.5, sorry, bad math on my part. Anyway, so it did not take 2.5 seconds for that display. Let's watch again. Okay, that took not as much time. That seems like it took maybe less than a second. And actually, it turns out it did take less than a second. It only took 822 milliseconds to display all 4 items, because each one was displayed as soon as it completed. So we've got them going out of order, and oh, I was going to do this little trick too again. Console.log. All done, right? And what happens here? Oops, not console.log, sorry, log. And I also do have this in the console, so if I open up the console, you can see that it's being logged there as well. Actually, that should have been an apply, not a call. No, not that one, sorry, this one. On the console.log, so it would log it correctly. But anyway, so we can see that, you know, the all done, of course, is happening first, because even though it's happening after the loop, the things that are going on inside of the loop are actually happening after things outside of the loop. So to correct this again, I'm just going to do var forEachAsync equals window.forEachAsync. This is how it loads from Bower. If you're using some sort of require system, then you can also do require in the browser, except it would be forEachAsync just like it was in Node. Anyway, I'll let you come to your own conclusions about that in the time that you need them. So yeah, there we have forEachAsync. I'm pulling it in from window. And then I'm just going to replace this line 14, the forEach with forEachAsync, put the array in as the first argument, and then change the callback so it takes a next. And then make sure that after the timeout's completed, that next gets called. And then put a .then, throw the final condition into the then. Refresh this. All right, now you see that they're always in the right order, and they each take the amount of time that the timeout is set for before proceeding to the next one. Okay, so those are two examples, both a concrete and an abstract example, showing how you can get some funky behavior with asynchronous loops, and how if you use forEachAsync, you can get well-defined behavior. And again, look for the other module. I'll just bring it up real quick. The other module that I have is called lateral, that has similar behavior to forEachAsync, but it sequences out batches at a time. Actually, I forgot, forAllAsync also does that. Both of forAllAsync allows you to batch out a certain number of requests at a time, as does lateral. So that you know, because if you have 1,000 items, you probably don't just want to do one at a time. You might want to do 4, except in the case of file system reads, in which case you pretty much always just want to do 1 so that it's faster. But yeah, and I'll probably cover those two things in a later tutorial. Just know that they exist, check them out. If forEachAsync doesn't look like it's powerful enough, probably forAllAsync will be. And if that isn't, then lateral definitely will be. All right. Thanks for watching. Give me a like or a subscribe or comment, or, you know, any of that stuff. Thanks. If this was useful for you, please go ahead and give that little thumbs up button a nice click. Also, you'll see the notes are in the comments section down below. You can either at the end of the article or right up at the top. Give it a like, tweet, +1, whatever. Thanks.